To be honest, I didn't have an idea for this week's video. I have some stuff in the works coming up, don't worry, but for this week right now, I wasn't sure what to do. So I had the idea of just going to the store, picking out a random movie, and then just talking about it and hoping that it would make for good content. And my oh my, do I think I found something. May I introduce you to Rollerball? This is a 1975 sci-fi action film starring James Caan. One of the reasons why I picked this is because I just watched Misery for the first time and quite enjoyed him in that. But really, I was sold on what the back of the box said for its synopsis, so I will read that to you right now. The year is 2018. Omnipotent corporations have created a utopian society, free of war, poverty, starvation, and disease, in exchange for compliance by its people. To entertain the people's thirst for violence, the corporations have come up with a solution: Rollerball, a vicious sport that pits man against metal and machine in a savage circular arena. But when one of its superstars, Jonathan E., played by James Caan, starts to threaten the establishment by becoming a larger-than-life hero, his corporate boss, Bartholomew, played by John Houseman, orders him to hang up his spikes. Jonathan, displaying a rare act of disobedience, refuses to quit, and the battle of wills outside the ring reverberates back into the game, where Bartholomew amps up the ante and changes the rules. Now Rollerball becomes a grueling match to the death, which will leave only one man standing, ... and only one man alive. So yeah, I thought that was a pretty interesting synopsis for a movie, and especially the fact that it takes place in 2018. I really wanted to see what a 1975 version of 2018 would look like, and so I picked it up and I watched it, and wow, let's talk about it. Before I really talk about the sport of Rollerball, let me just break down the plot, because I think it's easier to digest that way. So basically, Jonathan E., he's our main guy, right? Played by James Caan. He's the best of the best. He's the top athlete in Rollerball. He's on the top of his game, but he's getting a little old. And you can sort of see it. He's kind of the oldest guy on the court, but he's still killing it. And Rollerball is a sport created by these corporations. Basically, government is no more. All the countries went bankrupt and were bought out by corporations. And there are 6 big corporations that kind of rule everything, and each one of the 6 corporations has their own Rollerball team. Those 6 corporations being transport, food, communication, housing, luxury, and energy. And Jonathan E. plays for the energy company, which is based in Houston. And it does take place in this dystopia where before every Rollerball game, they have to stand for the corporate anthem. But the Rollerball athletes don't really like listening to the corporate anthem, and they don't like participating in this. What a dystopian world this is. We learned that the Energy Corporation actually took Jonathan E.'s wife away from him because one of the higher executives in the company just wanted his wife. And so he was like, sorry, buddy, I'm going to take your wife now because I'm higher status than you. Which leads me to one of the movie's biggest problems is just how it treats women. Every woman in this movie is either a receptionist or one of Jonathan's many girlfriends that just the corporation assigns him. He's like, here, have some girls to keep you happy so you don't complain. It's not a very good depiction of women for something you'd think that takes place in the future. Not much gender progression has been made there. Also, if you're wondering why his name is Jonathan E., it's basically never explained. He's like the only person with a last initial in his name, and I just thought this was kind of a commentary on individualism, about how, you know, individualism doesn't exist anymore, so people don't have last names, but Jonathan E. is the only person with this sort of last initial, therefore making him an individualist, and you can read into that further if you want. We also learned that a corporate war took place, and there used to be 3 different nations that existed, and then the corporate wars happened, and then that led to how things are now. But this is all backstory and lore. The main conflict of the movie is that the energy company that basically owns Jonathan E. is like, we want you to retire. And Jonathan E. does not want to retire. The energy company puts on a big television special of Jonathan's greatest hits, his sports highlights, And at the end of it, they expect Jonathan to retire, but then Jonathan doesn't retire, and it's kind of embarrassing for the company. And then they're like, oh, we're mad at you because you're not retiring. And so basically, Jonathan really wants to play in the upcoming game against Tokyo. But the corporations changed the rules of the game, so now basically killing is allowed, and they're like, Jonathan, if you play in this Tokyo game, you might die, and if you die, then no one's going to remember you, everyone's going to think you're weak, but if you retire right now, you go out as a hero, you're at the top of your game, it makes sense, you're old, everyone loves you, you're a hero, but if you go in that game and die, no one will remember you. But Jonathan plays in the Tokyo game anyway, and some of the Tokyo players end up killing one of Jonathan's closest friends, Moonpie. But it turns out Moonpie isn't actually dead, he was just put in a coma. But Jonathan basically thinks he's dead, and so to get revenge, Jonathan kills some people on the Tokyo team, and the Houston team wins. Then there's a scene where Jonathan visits this supercomputer named Zero. And Zero has basically all literature stored in its database. Basically, paper doesn't exist anymore. Anything that's written down is now stored in Zero. And Jonathan wants to go to the computer and ask it, like, hey, what's up with the corporate wars? What happened in the past? I want to know about this stuff. How did these corporations come to power? And the computer refuses to answer Jonathan. And it's like, a power structure where information in history is gatekept from its people. How dystopian. So Jonathan doesn't get the answers that he's looking for, and he eventually runs into Ella, his wife, that was taken away from him. And it's like, oh, the two of them get together and bond again and spend some quality time together. But then it's revealed that Ella was actually sent by the corporations to convince Jonathan to retire. And it's like, sorry, I'm not going to retire. I missed you, though. He says this as he's going into the World Championships, where the corporations change the rules again to basically there are no rules. There are no penalties, no substitutions, and no time limit. So basically the game just goes until everyone's dead. Jonathan still plays. And as you'd think, people on each team start dying off as they're killing each other, and then Jonathan is left with this one other person on the other team. He beats him up, but eventually shows him mercy as to show the world kindness, I guess. And then he scores the winning goal, and then is like, boom, I beat the system, end credits. And yeah, that's how the movie ends. Now, before we talk about what all of that means, let me explain to you the sport of rollerball. Basically, it takes place on this huge roller derby track, and each team, it's not specified how many people are on each team or how many people are allowed to be on the court at the same time, but it doesn't matter. Each team has one motorcycle. That's right, there's a motorcycle involved, and the people on roller skates, everyone else is on roller skates, can hang on to the back of the motorcycle to gain speed, but also they're allowed to like punch each other and hit each other, sort of roller derby style. It's not explicitly said how much they can hurt the other person before it becomes a penalty, but eventually penalties don't matter anymore, so they don't care to explain it. And there's a giant heavy metal ball that gets shot out and spins around the track, sort of roulette style, and the first team to pick it up becomes offense, and then they have to score it into the sort of magnetic whole thing, and then they get a point. And I have to say that the rollerball scenes are shot pretty well, actually. Like, you can keep track of the action, and it's 1975, so all the stunts are practical. I learned through my research, actually, that this is the first major studio picture that gave on-screen credit to all of the stunt team, and yeah, I'd say the stunt team deserves it, but of course, James Caan did all of his own stunts for this. And yeah, it just looks great. Everything's practical, and if it was done nowadays, there would be lots of CGI involved, but maybe we'll talk about that point later. But yeah, that's how you play the game Rollerball. All the scenes of it are shot very well, and I had a blast watching those scenes. But now let's talk about what it all means. I have to admit, I was pretty confused after I finished watching this movie. So I had to do some outside research to really understand everything. And through my research, I learned that, this is a cult classic movie. It has its cult following. And after really reading everything, I understand why. And so I'll link the articles that I read in the description if you're interested in reading them. They have some great insight in this film. One of the main themes of the film is ageism in sports, about how people get older, they're sort of forced to retire and quit because they're not as good as they used to be. And as you can see in the film, that Jonathan E. is the oldest guy out there in the roller rink, but, he's the best. He's still the best, and he's still got it, even though people are sort of forcing him to retire as he's much older. And we'll get to more of that retirement in a second. Another big theme of the film is that capitalism is bad. Of course, it's not saying anything new, but it's saying it in a new way, and which is interesting. I don't really need to spoon feed it to you. Corporations own everything and then control the people and steal their wives away from them. So yeah, that's capitalism is bad. Yeah, okay, agreed. Another theme is how humans are drawn to violence. Of course, Rollerball is the main sport, and it gets millions of viewers. It's like around the world. People are just drawn to watching these people hurt each other. And you can apply this to various different physical sports if you want, or even gladiatorial times in the Roman Empire. It's like, yeah, we have this inclination to watch other people get hurt. And of course, you can relate this to the movie itself, as we, the audience, are enjoying watching this movie where people get hurt in sort of that meta sense. But I think the absolute central theme of the film is individualism. I think the quote that puts it perfectly is when Bartholomew, he's the main bad guy, he says this. The game was created to demonstrate the futility of individual effort. Let the game do its work. Basically, what that means is that the corporation wants Jonathan to retire because he's too good at what he does. He rises above everyone else in the sport and shows his performance at an individual level, to where all the fans love him individually. They don't love the team, they love Jonathan. And Jonathan sort of rises to become sort of this almost godlike person who's being worshipped by the common people, and the corporations find that dangerous. Of course, in the real world, people worship athletes and look up to athletes, and then corporations use that by putting these athletes' pictures on cereal boxes and merchandise and all that to make more money. But what happens when a beloved athlete speaks out against the corporation or speaks on his own terms for something he believes in? I wonder if that's ever happened in the real world. That can be pretty dangerous, seen through the eyes of the corporation. So they really want Jonathan to retire. They're like, stop, before you do anything crazy, retire now. You'll be a hero, you'll be beloved, you'll get all this money, you'll still live in your mansion, live in your penthouse, get all the women you want, except your wife. She belongs to us now because in this movie, women are just property. And then, yeah, be happy with your life. And Jonathan refuses to do that. A different interpretation of this is people say the director made this as an allegory of corporate Hollywood versus auteur directors, and how, of course, the corporation's going to win every single time because they have the most money and overpower the voices of the small, individual, independent filmmaker. And yeah, I can totally see that, and it relates as well. Now, this film might sound very basic. It's another dystopian thing where corporations control everything, and then people fight to the death for people's entertainment, very much like Hunger Games. But what's different is in Hunger Games, Katniss is like low class. She's in District 12, I think, and she's working class, she's out there getting dirty. Everyone in her district is poor, but she rises above the odds and shows the people that, hey, the everyday person can take down the corporations and win the Hunger Games. But in this, Jonathan E. is upper class. Like, he's an all-star athlete with all the money he could ask for, and he has no reason to, fight against these corporations other than they took his wife, and now they want to take away the only thing he's good at. We never see what life is like for the common person, the viewer watching Rollerball, but as the back of the box states, that they do live in a world free of war, poverty, starvation, and disease. So it's like they can't have it that bad, right? And we just never see the outside world through the common person's perspective. And I'd like to see what it's like if, it's a perfectly utopian society. If you do think the movie would be better from the working class, kind of fighting the odds, sticking it to the man, may I introduce you to the 2002 remake of the same name? Oh yeah, I watched it. Okay, so I don't really know where to begin when talking about the 2002 remake, so let me just list off a bunch of differences that have nothing to do with each other. First big difference is that Jonathan is no longer a middle-aged man near the end of his career. He's a pretty soft boy in his 20s that has only been playing rollerball for 4 months. Second big difference is that this movie takes place in 2005, where it's not much more of a dystopian future as it is just a few years in the future. Third main difference is that basically the entire thing takes place in Middle Asia, and where everyone there, if you're not a rollerball player, you work in the mines. Every common person, every working class person works in the mines. What are they mining? I don't know. Am I on the fourth? I think the fourth main difference is that the rollerball teams are now composed of women as well. Women can be on these rollerball teams, and now these teams are composed of people from all around the world. So on one team, you can get an American person, a Chinese person, a Russian person, a Mexican person. You know, they're taken from all over the world and put onto one team instead of this one team is from Houston, and now they're fighting the one team from Tokyo. You know, and so yeah, all the teams are comprised of different people all around the world, men and women. And of course, since it's 2002, they have to wear these ridiculous looking uniforms so they look cool. Some of the players are given nicknames like the Black Widow, while other players just have their regular names, like Jonathan. The main plot of this movie isn't that the big corporation is trying to get Jonathan to retire because he's too much of a central figure in the sport, but it's about Jonathan discovering that the corporations rig the games to where violence always happens, and then violence makes the ratings go up. Like near the midpoint, Jonathan tries to run away from the corporation and his team and tries to get across the Russian border, but he can't do this. His friend escapes, and we don't really see him again, I don't think. And then Jonathan gets captured, and then he goes back to his team, where he's forced to play one last round of rollerball. And guess what? There's no rules this time, no penalties, no whatever. This movie ends with the rollerball players actually joining forces and killing the corporate owners of their teams, and by throwing like the really heavy ball into their faces and then shooting them with guns and just beating them up. And then, yeah, they start the revolution. This movie is about 20 minutes shorter than the original because the original was just so long, and there are some scenes from the original I think can be cut. But this movie really is just a dumbed down version of the original, saying corporations are bad. It's a much more easy to follow plot of just, you know, this young, relatable guy trying to take down the world, basically Hunger Games style, which I think this version makes the 1975 original version a lot more nuanced, and it makes you really respect how the original movie does what it does and its way of conveying its themes and messages. In conclusion, I'm glad I picked up this VHS because it gave me an experience I've never experienced before, and I'm always happy when a movie can do that for me. And if you want to watch the original or the 2002 remake, both movies are on Tubi, so you can watch them both for free. And if you do, let me know what you think of them in the comments. Or if you already know about Rollerball, if you're one of its cult followers and love it to death, and I just horribly explained the plot and meaning to you, be sure to yell at me in the comments as well. I'd love to know your perspective and why you love this movie so much. It's a fun little enigma of a movie that I don't think we'll get to see anything like this ever made again. So be sure to check out Rollerball, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye!